Do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Matthew 5:17 is what some scholars consider to be the thesis statement of Matthew. Our four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, have stories that overlap or are the same, but each one has unique meaning, each Gospel has unique meaning, and was written for a specific purpose. Matthew was written specifically for a Jewish audience to understand that Jesus fits into the story of Judaism and transforms it. Verse 17 could also be kind of foreshadowing. We know the book of Matthew ends with Jesus' crucifixion, which takes place in part because the religious leaders of the day accused him of breaking the law. And here in verse 17, Jesus is almost giving himself a defense by proclaiming that it's not his intent to get rid of the law. We sometimes call the law the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The law was a central tenet to Jewish culture at the time. It wasn't just the religious leaders who followed it, it was the law of the land, and it had been for centuries. So, Jesus claiming a new way forward wasn't just unheard of, it was scandalous. I want you to keep that word in mind as we read through the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. This was a scandalous teaching. For the rest of chapter 5, Jesus begins his teachings with, "You have heard that it was said this, but I tell you blank." Jesus is referencing the law to those who know it backwards and forwards, and invites them into a new way of thinking about it. To use an image from one of my Old Testament classes in college, the law had been used as a perimeter ethic. Here is the boundary, don't go past it. Like do not murder, which David is going to get into. Murdering is the boundary. Jesus isn't doing away with that. Murder is very much still a perimeter ethic that we shouldn't cross. But Jesus is saying, don't do that. And here are the centering principles that I want you to live by, because it will change your life and it will change the world. After verse 17, Jesus goes on to say, I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Anyone who breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. What Jesus is getting at is a matter of righteousness. We talked about righteousness last semester. Righteousness is doing what is right in God's eyes. Jesus pointing to the Pharisees and teachers of the law as sort of the esteemed law followers and righteous people is funny, because we know they are the ones who constantly try to trap Jesus in breaking the law when he does things like heal others on the Sabbath. Jesus is technically breaking the law by doing that, but he is also doing what is righteous. So what does this mean? What does this mean for us? I think a couple of things. First, the Old Testament has a value for our lives just as much as the New Testament does. The Old Testament is the story of the people of God trying to be faithful and follow him, just like we are doing. If we focus exclusively on the New Testament, we miss out on the whole story. Second, sometimes we have to break with the norm to do what is righteous. What are some examples you can think of where Scripture seems to directly go against what Jesus has to say? Or maybe it's not even found in Scripture, but where do people of faith tend to contradict a Jesus-centered principle of righteousness? There are plenty of examples we could name and think of. Jesus is the one we look to for our righteousness, no one else. The Sermon on the Mount is, I think, one of Jesus' most difficult teachings, and I'm excited to dive into it with you guys this semester.